Welcome back to another edition of the Musketeer Madness podcast. And all I can say is, wow, there's a lot to break down since the last time we talked. I don't even know how to start. Um, the last time we went on was before the Big East, or it was right before the Big East tournament when I had Adam Baum on. Obviously, John, you have been very busy starting your new job and moving up to Peoria, Illinois, in the minor league business. And so, obviously, a lot has happened. If you're watching this podcast, you probably are debriefed on everything that's gone down in the last week, but it will go do a quick rundown and timeline real quick. So, after that Marquette loss a couple of weekends ago, things were looking real iffy, 50-50. And then it was literally like, watching all those mid-major conference championships, the A10, the Mountain West, the American, it was like, all right, we're just hoping against any sort of bid stealer. There was only one, and it was a coin flip going into Selection Sunday. North Carolina's the first team named. Once North Carolina's named, that's when I think me and the rest of the Xavier fan base is like, all right, that's it. Sixth straight year or sixth year of not making the tournament out of 7 years. And then out of a big surprise, Xavier got named in the second to last region of the tournament in a first four matchup with Texas to play Illinois in Milwaukee. And I think there was a lot of hype. It was like, all right, the opening line was like Xavier minus 3.5, and Xavier had been hot, and it was like, all right, we kind of just hoped for just to get into the tournament, and then once they're in, because of how hot they've been, then you feel like you got a really good shot. And there was a lot of excitement around that game. Then our boss and some other media members made some comments here and there that were started to make fans wonder about the possibility of Texas firing Rodney Terry, and then Sean Miller would be one of the favorite names. Which, by the way, disclaimer. So all of this is happening, and obviously we haven't gotten into the important stuff. All this is happening while my computer just straight up died in the middle of last week. I mean, it is literally the worst possible timing. I'll give you the timeline. So the NIT game was on Wednesday night. John, you were busy, but I had a video filmed with the Texas Field of 68 guys just to preview the Xavier Texas game. We filmed it. I was done editing it. Once I was uploading that video was when my computer died. It is still dead. It's in a repair shop right now. I'm using my roommate's computer right now. So it heard a lot of good things. And what he said on the podcast, which obviously no one got to see, it was just between us, but he did say he thought three was the magic number for Rodney Terry. He needed to win 3 games in March Madness to keep his job at Texas. Obviously, one crazy game on Wednesday night. Xavier somehow came on top after what feels like they played horribly in almost all facets of the game until the last 12 minutes of the basketball game and came back and beat Texas after being down 13, being down 8 at halftime. And that was when vibes were at an all-time high. Horns down, flying around the locker room. Sean Miller talking about the excitement and one of the best games he's been a part of, and how he doesn't really care about the next opponent. And then there's more chatter because it feels like it's coming official that Rodney Terry is going to be gone. There's a little bit more chatter about Sean Miller to Texas. On Friday, Xavier just gets their butts kicked by Illinois. And I would have said this again if I had a way of recording a podcast before that game and I had a computer. Illinois is the kind of team where they're really good or really bad, and you don't really control that. I always say, like, you don't have control going into a game against Illinois. They're either going to shoot 50% from three, and there's just not much you could do, or they're going to shoot horribly from three and shoot themselves out of it. Xavier caught them on a bad day, and it proved on Sunday when they got killed by Kentucky. But after the loss to Illinois, there was a weird vibe. And it was pretty much the next morning where the rumors started to become really loud that Sean Miller was going to take the Texas job. Sunday morning, when a lot of the reports came, first a Texas beat writer wrote that Sean Miller, for the second time, would be leaving Xavier for Texas. Obviously not Texas the second time, but second time he left Xavier after 3 to 5 years. And I think in some ways it was shocking because you had a few days for Xavier fans to maybe really process that this might be a possibility, but it was a short turnaround. And obviously, we hear now that this has been in the works since the regular season, really. And shocking, I think, is the word to use. I kind of said it at the beginning of his tenure, like you felt like there was a good chance he was going to leave again. He did it the first time, but I didn't think it was going to be after 3 years, especially making the tournament in two of those 3 years. And then he's gone. Um, then you turn around, and it looks like everything was pointing towards Chris Mack. And Chris Mack was seemed like the heavy favorite. Looking at a lot of reporters and what other people were saying, sounds like Chris Mack really wanted the job. There's even the report that the players have been reaching out to media members with the list, guys in the portal with the list of teams that have reached out. And Chris Mack was even reaching out as Charleston/Xavier. Like he really wanted that job, is what it seemed like. And it seemed like they're going to give it to him. And then late on Tuesday night, he said he's not coming. And at first, a lot of people thinking that he's turning it down. I don't think it was him turning it down. Xavier said no because 30 minutes later, John Rothstein announced that Rich Pitino Jr. is going to be the next head coach of Xavier Basketball. John Baldridge, you have not had a chance to talk, and this has been like 25 minutes just going through what the last week, literally a week, has been like here at Xavier Nation. The just absolute roller coaster of emotions the last week has been for the fan base. I I don't know. I guess give me your thoughts. You can talk about the basketball game. You could talk even back to the Marquette game, March
Yeah.
Madness, the NIT, and Sean leaving, and then the hiring of Patino. What are your first thoughts that you just want to let out?
Well, it's great to be back with you, Ben. It really has been a whirlwind of a week. I still got my coat on. It's moving to Peoria, as you mentioned. We're going through this whole week spell where, Xavier picks up a win against Texas. They get ready for Illinois, and they don't play well. It just feels like another disappointment. You get to the round of 64, and you get ready for next year. Paul Frischner's last question on Friday night was, what are you looking forward to next year, Sean? And we're hoping for the next year and building that roster back up, bringing back some of those guys like Conwell and like Swain, and just a different story. 2 days later, Sean Miller's gone. It felt like in that hour span, I got a text on my phone that said Sean Miller's in consideration for a job. An hour later, he's taken that job by a lot of reports, first reported by John Fanta and plenty more reports out there. And then the story comes Chris Mack. And Chris Mack has been the guy, just like Sean Miller, who left Xavier, was a Xavier alum, and now he wants to come back. And it felt kind of like weird timing for that for a lot of Xavier fans. I know you felt like it was the right fit. A lot of Xavier fans felt like that was the sure fit. But it did feel kind of like weird timing. And as Greg Christopher and a lot of that Xavier athletic department maybe thought the same story, maybe it was Chris Mack not wanting to come back. We're not exactly sure. We don't want to speculate on why Chris Mack, what happened with that situation, if he sat down with Xavier and how that played out. But Richard Pitino, late last night on that Tuesday night, was able to take the job, wasn't offered other jobs. Talk about Villanova, VCU was thrown into the mix as jobs he maybe was offered, but really was only offered one job on a radio show. He talked about that on Wednesday morning and took the job with the Musketeers, and I can be more proud. I'm excited. I think it's a home run hire, as a lot of people have said. Richard Pitino, of course, the son of Rick Pitino, was an assistant for Rick for a long time, went to a Big East school as a student, and now he's back in the Big East after going to Lobos. And he had some down years. He was at 31 when he got hired at Minnesota. He was 31 years old, was there 8 years. Didn't go great, but he went down to New Mexico and Albuquerque, turned around that program, left in a better spot than where he started. And now he's here at Xavier, and it's going to be exciting to see how this all plays out. I think it's a home run hire. I think if you want to build success, you got to go with a young coach. Don't know how long he'll be here if he has success, but you got to take it one day at a time. And I just think it's the right fit for Greg Christopher and that athletic department to take a chance to go outside the family, as we talked about. A lot of people said to go outside the family, go outside the familiar, and to bring in a different guy that can change the culture. And the culture should be winning at Xavier. And I think Richard Pitino is a great fit for this Xavier basketball program.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit, but even off air, like we haven't had the chance to really go through all of this. With everything that happened last week, I have a lot of thoughts going back all the way to the selection, to Xavier getting selected in the tournament, um, to the first four game. But honestly, right now, like I don't that doesn't matter anymore. Like that
Yeah.
was so short lived, and that's what happens when the tournament game when you turn around and play 2 days later. I will. The short thing I'll say is like that Wednesday game. I know it's the first four. Like that is going to go down as one of my favorite Xavier basketball games in a long time. I mean, the John Hughley three, the Zach Freeman, a couple of tough post hooks, um, just pretty awesome, and Dalen Swain finishing it off with that putback and making some free throws down the stretch. That was a something as a Xavier fan, like that was one of my favorite games, I think. But like the feeling I had for that on Thursday compared to the feeling I have for it now is just so different. And I know that's like kind of like an obvious statement because they lost the next day, but I don't think that's part of it. I think if you're a Xavier fan, all those positive emotions that you have with Sean Miller are kind of just down the drain.
Yeah.
Look, I get it. I do like I get the argument for Texas and obviously the resources being better. It doesn't like sound like the salaries being that much better. And there was so much going on behind the scenes that we don't know. We like you said, like I don't want to speculate 100% everything that happened. And he went somewhere with more resources. And the decision to leave Xavier go to Texas is not the thing that stings the most. I think it's just all the things that Sean Miller has said in the last 3 years. I think it's tough to look back on the first year he got here and everything he said in the press conference, and that's not as much as I put weight on, but like the strongly worded statements, the whatever the date was, March 25th, I think 2023, saying he or 2022, saying he hopes people look back on that day as one of the great days in Xavier basketball history, truly showing that like he cared for the university very early on. I think, in my personal opinion, the way things played out the last 3 years, looking back, in hindsight's 2020, I don't think that he planned on being here long anyway.
Yeah.
Again, it's
That's the same
speculation.
feeling I kind of got it with that, and we hit on the same narrow edge. It's where you look at this roster, and we always talked about it this year. We talked about the injuries with Trey Vorey and then Trey Green deciding to take a red shirt. But you look at this team, and it felt like Xavier wasn't talented in some spots. They didn't have a whole lot of size, and we can go to Illinois, we can go back to Michigan. They kind of had that size factor against us where Illinois, they have either have a great game, as you talked about, or they're not playing very well. And they took it right to us inside. Felt like they really took it to Fremantle. And you just look at the roster this year, Ben, and I felt kind of spotty about it most of the time. And hopefully Richard Pitino, because of the name, because of who he is, because of his experience at a young age, already coaching at a high level and knowing how NIL works, it can be a whole different factor for Xavier fans worried about, all right, are we going to get good talent? Who are we going to get back? Is Swain going to come back? Is Conwell going to come back? And if we can get those guys back and if we can add guys who Richard Pitino can bring in because of, yes, his name and because of his experience in coaching, it could be a different feel around Xavier in 2 to 3 years because Sean Miller, you can talk about it. 3 years at Xavier since coming back. Yes, a Sweet 16 team, but that was a lot of players who were Travis Steele was the head coach. A lot of those guys stuck around, but only really that one tournament win this year. Didn't go to the tournament last year and that Sweet 16 run. So wasn't a whole lot of promise from, yes, Sean Miller, who's a very successful coach in the years, but just hasn't had a whole lot of success in that second tenure back with Xavier. And it'll be interesting if they can get some better talent here over the years to come with Richard Pitino.
Yeah. No, I mean, going back to kind of what I was saying, and I agree. We'll get to the Rich Pitino stuff later. I'm still trying to give my thoughts here on Sean and
Yeah.
everything. Again, the one of we were talking about building for the future, and it never felt like he planned on being here long because of how he built for the future. It was everything out of the portal. And look, that's what a lot of coaches are doing nowadays. But I think that you still need high school talent. I mean, you're not going to win in college basketball without it. Um, you look at that sheet that's like every school's starting five in the Sweet 16 based on where they started in college. And most schools have at least like two or three guys that started at their own school. I mean, transfers usually can make up about half your roster, but I think that everything in his 3 years at Xavier, to me, looking back at this, makes it look like he was just trying to paint himself in the best picture to get a job later on. And there's so many things that go into that. One of them, I think, is the not building much for the future. I think in his, I think there were five total freshmen in his 3 years that he brought in at Xavier, if you're including Forsyth and Lewis, who obviously haven't, said anything about decommitting, but I would assume that they're not going to stay at Xavier, at least as of right now, waiting on conversations with Pitino. But the not building for the future is one of the things for me that just constantly making excuses about injuries. And look, I get last year. I still will 100% give them a pass for how bad they were last year because of how hard losing Fremantle and Hunter is the beginning of the season. But like the pouting and everything before the Traore injury before this season, like that was really tough to me to see that and just be like, once again, when you're a fan in the moment, like you buy into all that stuff, you trust what your coach is saying, and you really, think to yourself, like, all right, this is really what's going on. And you really want to be like, all right, it's Xavier against the world. Everybody's getting hurt out here. In reality, like your starting center got hurt before the season, but if you have one guy getting hurt in a whole year, like it's college basketball, man. Like that's fine. Like that's a good thing. And Traore would have been an important piece. They would be a better basketball team with him this year. I do agree that, but it's not like the expectations were like, all right, this is a borderline second weekend team. It's a top 25 team coming into the year. With Traore on the court, that does not make them a top 25
Yeah.
team in my eyes. So I think it's just how much he made excuses with those kind of things and got so down and acted like it was Xavier against the world and him against the world with everything like that. The last thing is the all the media that came out. I mean, Adam Baum, Paul Fritchner, Josh Semstrad, a bunch of people involved that just did such an awesome work with the All In documentary, the Sean Miller podcast. Those are like their jobs now, and I really believed and thought at the when that was going, I was like, okay, Sean is trying to paint Xavier in a better light. Like he is trying to show with all this media that Xavier is an awesome school. And they did such a great job with that. I think that something All In did is like there's some borderline Xavier fans out there who might have watched that docu-series and like, okay, this makes Xavier a very likable program. And, it went both ways. It showed the school was awesome. It showed the program was awesome. It showed Sean Miller was awesome. That's what I got from the Sean Miller podcast, from the All In docuseries. Um, and that's what Sean Miller wanted, and that's definitely what they did. And the more I look back, I feel like that it was a move to kind of rekindle his image a little bit. Obviously Xavier kind of gave him a second chance after everything that happened. His public image was pretty low. Um, and I feel like these kind of things, from Sean Miller's motivation, and this is not at all saying anything about Josh, Paul, Adam, but from Sean's motivation that this might have been more self-driven over school-driven. Again, it's speculate. Like this is just
Yeah.
how this situation looks like to me. I have no evidence that says that Sean Miller hated being a part of Xavier University and didn't care about Xavier University. But I think this move and how everything went down and how messy the departure was, I think kind of shows that he did not care about the university nearly as much as he set out to be. I'm not trying to absolutely bash this guy. I'm really not. He is a good basketball coach. He did good things for Xavier. And I know Xavier fans are like don't like that's kind of stuff they don't want to hear, but he did. I just think there were a lot of things that he said in the last 3 years that make it almost impossible for like Xavier fans to ever trust him again, or for even fans in another school to really. I don't know how much of his word you really take.
I think the thing with fans are they're just frustrated because there's always opportunities for coaches to go to a new school. I think what Xavier fans are frustrated about, and you mentioned people who worked with him day in and day out, like Paul Frischner, like Adam Baum, these guys who make the Sean Miller podcast, who did all this work to build their brand because of Sean Miller. And he turns around and leaves for a job in about an hour. It feels like, okay, we hear a report, he's considered for a job. An hour, 2 hours later, he's taken the job. And I think that's where fans get frustrated. They're like, not sure how much he really bought into this all in that Xavier talked about, how Xavier talked about building for the future. And I think you make a great point, as we talked about a lot. Where is the future? You talk about the two freshmen, the incoming freshmen, not sure if they're going to come back. But Xavier took a risk, and it was a big risk. It's somebody outside of their familiar, outside of the Chris Macks of the world. Bring in Richard Pitino, who, yes, went to a private college in the Big East, but isn't a Xavier guy. Doesn't really know much, a whole lot about this program besides just occasionally seeing them on TV and his father coaching the league and growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, where his father was the coach for the University of Louisville Cardinals for a long time. So right up the road. But besides that, he's not a Xavier guy. So to go out to Vermilion, to get a young coach who started his coaching career at 31 and now take over at 42 for his third different program in the Big East to go up against his father. We even talked about that, going against him possibly 2 or 3 times every year, which will draw the most attraction Xavier's seen on the basketball circuit in a long time on those Fox games. I'm sure he'll be at the Garden and at the Cintas Center, maybe back at the Garden in the tournament. But to bring in that attraction is something Xavier hasn't seen in a long time. And I'm going to say it. I wish the best for Sean Miller. It's disappointing that he left in the time span he did, and there's a lot of frustration about it. But we wish the best for him, and hopefully the best comes here for Xavier in the years to come.
Yeah, it is. We're talking about the past a lot, and we'll get to the future because I think there's a lot of things I want to talk about too with Rich Pitino and all the potential there. The last thing I want to talk about with this whole process before we move to the future, and I want to, I'll give my piece, and I want to hear your opinion about it too because this is one of the things we texted about a little bit. We didn't get a detail about it. Was the next question immediately? Sean's gone. Is
Yeah,
do you want Chris Mack? You and I had differing opinions on this. I was all aboard the Chris Mack train, and I know you weren't.
yeah.
My opinion about this was I feel like the biggest arguments against Chris Mack are like, all right, this is the same as Sean Miller. He's just going to leave us again. Like you need to get some sort of outside hire because you can't just keep recycling the same coaches. In my eyes, with the Chris Mack situation, I said this before 2018 when he left for Louisville, and I still believe it to be true. If there was any coach that would not leave Xavier, it was Chris Mack. Everything pointed to that. I mean, that guy bleeded Xavier University, bled Xavier University, navy blue and silver. Like he was from Cincinnati, went to St. X High School, played at Xavier, and then spent so much of his career as an assistant head coach at Xavier. And he made a mistake that he has gone record on saying he regretted. That's the difference in these situations. You can believe who you want. I believe Chris Mack to be maybe more true to his word than Sean Miller. Sean Miller never said like he regretted leaving Xavier the first time. Chris Mack has basically said it on the Sean Miller podcast, on other forms of media, that he regretted leaving Xavier for Louisville. So that kind of showed me that like, he wanted to be there. And then I just don't think that you can go about this picking the coach that you feel like wouldn't leave. Like again, I said I think if any coach would stay their whole career, it'd be Chris Mack. He didn't, so to me that means that no one would. And I think the second stint, I had more faith in Mac. Would have had more faith in Mac staying for his whole career if there was success there. And again, like I have no confidence Patino is going to stay his whole career. So it's like if the coach is going to leave, then why don't you get the best available coach? Which in my eyes was Chris Mack at the time. I still think the best basketball coach available was Chris Mack. Now the question becomes, basketball coach is like, I know it sounds funny, but basketball coach is only like 50% of a college basketball coach's job at this point. The other is being able to navigate everything through the NIL world. And Rich Pitino's done a pretty good job with that. And he's young, that gives him a leg up. There's a chance maybe they'd go hire GM or something with that sort of role. That's something Rich Pitino might be more willing to do. So I get that part. I'll give him the argument there. It's not a hire I'm upset with. I think there was a 5 to 10 minute stretch last night when it immediately got announced. I was really unsure. But I mean, I'm not going to not be excited about it. I think it was more just the frustration. I thought Chris Mack should have got it. Looking back, I see the arguments to both, and I am coming around on the hire. We'll get to Patino in a little bit, but I'll let you say your piece about your Chris Mack opinion.
I think they were the two best candidates out there. That's for sure. And I felt like public relations plays a big factor in this for Xavier. And if you can get away from the whole situation that you bring in a guy like Sean Miller, he leaves, and now you bring him back, and Chris Mack leaves, and you're going to bring him back. If you can get away from that, and you just look at strictly basketball, I think the question for Chris Mack is, and a lot of people worry about this as well, because when he was at Xavier leaving for Louisville, Chris Mack always talked about not coaching forever. And I think that's always been
Yeah.
his cup of tea or the kind of spill he wanted to put on it. And I don't know how long he wants to coach. I know he has kids growing up. He moved down to Charleston, which it is Charleston, South Carolina. If you've ever been there, it's a really nice area and it's hard to get away from there. And he was only there 1 year. So it might have been a tough get out of there situation card to get out of Charleston. I know it's the University of Charleston, but still it's hard to get out of a college when you're only there 1 year to come back to a school you're at before. And even if he was the best candidate, as you think, and a lot of fans do believe, that's a tough get for Xavier to get over all those obstacles. And Greg Christopher spoke with Richard Pitino. Seemed like he spoke to Chris Mack. Don't know what happened with Chris Mack, if it was more Chris Mack saying, I just can't leave after 1 year, or if it was Xavier saying, I don't know if we can go this route because of what just happened, or they just truly like Richard Pitino better, excuse me. But either way, I think Pitino is a great candidate. I think those two were top shelf. I mean, you look at Chris Mack, he took the team to a 2018 first round seed in that NCAA tournament. So you know he had success there. But Richard Pitino is young, and he's got those experienced years behind him. This is his 12th year in college basketball, I believe, coming this season. So he's got that talent. He knows NIL works is another big thing, as you mentioned. About 50% of that is NIL, bringing your coaches over, learning how that's going to work. It'll be interesting to see who Xavier brings back on their coaching staff from last year. If anybody, maybe Dante Jackson is the only guy a lot of people are saying, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I think both hires have been great, but I'm very excited to see Richard Pitino in that main seat.
Yeah. I am pretty confident in things that I've seen. Like, there's enough to put together that Chris Mack really wanted the job. I really don't think he pulled out at the last second. Like, I think this was Xavier. Like you said, it could be maybe they really thought Richard Pitino was the better candidate. It also just might be kind of the PR you talked about. Maybe it's not the best look if you do this after everything you did with Sean Miller. But that's enough of gripes and everything about what happened to the situation. I am excited about Richard Pitino. Once again, it's been 20 minutes to start this podcast of negativity. I think Pitino could do some really great things at
Yeah.
Xavier. And like you said, they're the top two candidates. If Chris Mack wasn't on the board, I think this would be the no-brainer. He has an interesting resume. So you go to the kind of beginning of his career. You mentioned it. He was hired at the University of Minnesota at 31 years old. That is a very young head coach. And he had assistant coaching stints on both his father's coaching staff at Louisville, Rick Pitino, one of the best coaches in the business, and then with Billy Donovan, who,
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to say with
Yeah.
who he coached, but there's an argument he's one of the best college basketball coaches ever with a back-to-back national championships in a short stint in college. So I think there was so much promise with him, and he'll be the first to say it. He just doesn't know if he was ready for that sort of job that early. But he learned a lot. And a lot of this is stuff I'm taking out of the words of John Fanta because obviously anybody who likes college basketball and Big East basketball is going to take his words as religion. But there's a lot he learned at Minnesota, and Minnesota is just not an easy job to win at. It's the worst basketball program in the Big Ten, besides maybe Washington at this point. And there have been so many coaches who have just gone there and failed. One of Xavier's own, Ben Johnson, is one of them as well. So he goes to New Mexico, a program that's in a tough spot. They got a bunch of weird stuff going on with the New Mexico State basketball program. It was a bunch of weird stuff when he first got there, and they struggled the first year. Next 3 years were solid, above 500 in the last 3 years. The last two made the NCAA tournament. And in this past season, he had some really talented players. Donovan Dent's probably the second best player in the portal currently. There's still a lot of time for players to enter the portal. He'll fall once some of the guys in March Madness enter. But as of right now, second best player in the portal. There are just some guys like Nelly Jr. Joseph is another really good player. True Washington's a good player. All of guys, which are guys that Xavier could potentially get. But he's somebody that I think two things stand out too that I think fit Xavier pretty well. His teams are very athletic and very good defensively, which Xavier fans know. They've been waiting for a good defensive team. That was never happening under Sean Miller. And then also very fast paced, and they shoot the ball pretty well. It's just a fun brand of basketball above anything else. Like if you're gonna suck, like at least be like the team. I guess this is my opinion, but like at least be like the team that scores 90 but maybe gives up 95 instead of like the Virginia that like is losing games 55 to 50 or like the Seton Hall and everything like that. So that's kind of where I stand on that. I think it's just a more fun brand of basketball. Other interesting part is like again, a big storyline out of all of this, going back to the Sean thing, was like, where does Xavier stand, resources wise, NIL wise, money wise? Um, it, it's tough to see. This is a program that a lot of the information is not disclosed. The rumors that I've seen is like 5 to 5.5 million for NIL. I don't know how much truth there is around that at all, but that's what seems to be the pretty popular opinion or guess, best estimation of kind of what the NIL looks like. Now, I talked about this on one of the spaces after the Richard Pitino news, and I think it's something that people need to be more aware of because it is something that, like, actually today, after I talked about it yesterday, or I guess we're filming this on Wednesday, I talked about this Tuesday, and then on Wednesday there are a bunch of articles that came out about this. So revenue sharing is coming next year. Schools have a cap of $20.5 million dollars for all sports to pay their athletes from their revenue. Now, the power conference schools that have both men's basketball and football, those schools will be able to pay the entirety of 20.5 million. They'll have no problem. If they could pay more, they would, but there's a cap at 20.5. The numbers that are coming out right now look like this. It's an average of 75% going to football, 15% going to men's basketball, 5% going to women's basketball, 5% going to other sports. Now, it's obviously up to the schools. If you do the math on that, that's around $3 million dollars for those power conference schools going to men's basketball. Now, Big East schools, they don't have to pay 75% to football.
Yeah.
Now, they're not getting the $20.5 million, dollars, not close to it, probably not even half of it. But, like, I think a pretty good estimation for Xavier is like if you get $6 or $7 million, you get $7 million and 90% of it's going to men's basketball, you're like doubling what Indiana's paying just in revenue sharing. NIL is still a thing. But I'm just using this because I go to Indiana University and I'm a student here. So just sake of comparison, if Indiana's got 10 million NIL, but only 13 million revenue sharing, like that's 13 million they're paying players. Xavier, if they only have 5 million NIL, but they got like 6 or 7 million in revenue sharing, like that evens the playing field a little bit. And it's funny, it went viral today. The SEC commissioner was crying about this, about how Big East schools have just such a leg up because of it against men's basketball schools. And to that I say like, okay, but you guys have all the money in NIL and everything like that. So and you made the decision. These are the rules that you wanted. SEC wanted. I mean, this is what they wanted to put in. So I think Big East instead of getting an advantage, I think it evens the playing field a little bit. Is how I would put it for Big East schools, and it certainly is something that's going to help Xavier.
Yeah, I think that's a lot to intake. We'll go all the way back to talking about Pitino and his young age. And, he started 31, and he mentioned multiple times when he left Minnesota, he was really down on himself, didn't think he did a well enough job there. And New Mexico took a risk on him, and he was successful there. When he left that program a couple days ago, he left in a better spot than it ever's been in the last 5, 6, 10 years. And he took the team to the NCAA tournament back in 2019 with Minnesota, and he took the team to the NCAA tournament this year, both round of 32, both against the same team, and lost against Michigan State. And the NIL is an interesting thing for Xavier because you mentioned Donovan Dent. I mean, if they can get Donovan Dent in there, he's might be the best guard in the country. He might be the best guard in the Big East next year if they can get him. And if he can come with his head coach over to Xavier, you're talking about a team who could be not just mid-pack in the Big East, but you're talking about a team they can bring back a couple guys like Conwell, like Swain. Who knows if Trey Vorey, how he's doing, but if they can get some of those guys back like that, they could be top dogs in the Big East, sitting right there with his father, and we'll see what happens in that situation. But this Xavier basketball team is in a good spot, but they got to be able, if, and because of his name, you feel like he can do it, if he can go out and Richard Pitino can go out and get good players, we'll see what happens for this 2025, 2026 year. But a lot of promise, Ben, from NIL situation. Now, with all the revenue sharing, I'm not sure exactly what that number looks like in the revenue sharing. As you mentioned, you bring up a lot of good points. And that was one thing that Richard Pitino talked about, wanting to move back east. His parents getting older, get closer back to them. His wife's parents getting older, getting closer back to them. But also getting back into the Big East where he went to school. Now he's going to coach in the Big East for the first time and go up against his father, but also a chance to go up in a conference that doesn't have football. So it helps out that revenue sharing. It helps out with Xavier possibly putting more money in their pocket to pay some of these players for this basketball season upcoming. And I'm excited. I'm excited to know if it was Chris Mack or if it was Richard Pitino, and it's Richard Pitino, and I'm excited to see what he can do for this program.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the last thing we want to talk about as we kind of wrap it up is, people wondering like, what does this team look like next year? And I guess going through it again, it's tough in this current day of age of college basketball. You said with his name is going to help a lot, and he has recruited decently well to Minnesota and New Mexico. I'd even say really well to those two schools, considering where their schools were before he got there.
Mhm.
Recruiting's like almost not that big of a deal anymore. It's literally who can give you more money. Like that's not like 100% of it, but that's like 80% of it. So I think that's where, a lot of it comes down to what actually is Xavier's financial situation. Them being a private university, it makes it so tough to actually know because they don't disclose a lot of the numbers. Um, but I the Donovan Dent thing is interesting. There are rumors going around that he said he like his agent put out a statement that was like, if you can't offer $3 million in NIL, then he's not going to accept your call. Which I don't know if Xavier's
Yeah.
open $3 million to one player. So that's
Yeah.
where I just don't know what's going on. I don't know what Ryan Conwell's valuation is going to be if he enters the portal. I do expect him to at least test the waters at some point, and there's a lot of good landing spots for him. I'm not sure. My guess right now, if we're recording this on Wednesday, what is it, March 26th? My guess right now is there are 0 players on the Xavier basketball team that were a part of the 2025 team that will be a part of this next year's team. And I don't think Donovan Dent will be there. I just don't think that maybe you can splurge on either Dent or Conwell. I think Swain's gone. I think the statement he made on social media kind of proves that he's gone. I think he's actually already 1 foot in the door at Ohio State, at least from the some of the reports I'm seeing. I think he's a Buckeye. I think a lot of people thought he was going to Texas. I don't know. I don't think Conwell's going to Texas. I think there's a good chance Conwell actually ends up at Indiana in his home state. Um, and Dent, he's going to go to like Kentucky or the highest bidder. I know that's what Xavier fans don't want to hear, and I definitely could be wrong. I'm not saying any of that's impossible, but that's just my best guess right now with the way that those three guys will be valued when it comes to NIL with other schools. That being said, you look at that and you hear that, and then you look at the available guys in the portal and you say to yourself, dang, I don't know who else they'd get. Again, when we're recording this, is the third day of the transfer portal being open. There are not even half the game's names that there are going to be once it's all said and done in the portal right now. A lot of guys they're in the Sweet 16, and some of the better players obviously are on the better teams. Will have their names in the transfer portal once their seasons are over, so it's nothing to panic about. But like not to be a Debbie Downer, like it's another first head coach situation. Travis Steele's first year, you returned a couple guys, but that was bad. Sean Miller's first year, now you returned everyone. And almost pretty much everyone besides Paul Scruggs, Nate Johnson. And that was a big reason they had so much success. I just don't think that happens anymore with the new NIL era and how everything's shaping up with the portal. Again, not to be a Debbie Downer, they can get guys in the transfer portal and have a solid year, but I wouldn't expect them to compete for the Big East this year if I had to guess right now. And also, the last thing I wanted to bring up with assistant coaches, Patino did say on his or on in some statement earlier, he is bringing all three assistants with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the his head assistant, I forget his name, is going to be a candidate for the New Mexico job. So there's a chance he doesn't go if he somehow gets the New Mexico job. But at least two assistants will be coming with Pitino. I don't see Dante staying. I don't see anyone from the staff staying besides like Kettler the strength coach, and like some behind the scenes guys. But I expect this to be a completely different Xavier bench. Before we end this, John, final thoughts.
It's you mentioned it. I think it's going to be a whole different roster. It's going to be a whole different feel. And it's a different feel we haven't had in a long time. We haven't had in this in since really Thad Matta. It's going to be interesting to see what this feeling feels like. As a Xavier alum, or going to be an alum here in May, it feels like this is a time for Xavier for the unfamiliar. And it feels like the unfamiliar is about the culture. And the culture right now for Xavier is one thing and one thing only: a winning culture. And if Xavier can be successful with Richard Pitino, can go out and get good players through the NIL, through revenue sharing, through bringing in good assets, I think the Xavier team will be successful for the years to come. I'm not sure how long, if Richard Pitino does well or does bad, but he might be here for a long time. He might be here for 3 years, but we're happy for having him here. And I feel like this team is ready to go because it's just going to be a promising time, bringing a new winning culture, and hopefully Bertino can do that.
John, I love it. Love the optimism. I think that's what a lot of Xavier fans want to hear right now. We will probably have more offseason content than normal with how crazy this offseason's been. So we are going nowhere. We'll have content coming up as a portal shakes down and more details on that kind of stuff come out. But for now, again, we're in this ride with you all. I know this is a very weird time, like John said. We appreciate anyone who's tuning in and listening and watching all of us. And it's just always grateful for being part of